which I will hand over to our STM, Charl, and he can have a quick talk about what he's going to talk about with getting back into skydiving and things like that. Over to you, Charl.
Thanks, Wade. Good morning, everyone, especially those from WA. I understand it's quite early over there. So we've been requested to have a quick chat about experiences since starting up skydiving again after the shutdown. So we all know we've been shut down since around about middle March for most drop zones. And it's obviously everybody's been waiting to start jumping again. And it's been a kind of a uncertain start because there's been a lot of unclear messages, and nobody was quite certain when we'd be able to start jumping again and what the requirements would be. And then the confusion between different states was not helping at all, because there wasn't a consistent approach in terms of management of how industry was opening up again, and sport and tourism, etc. And some of the messages even inside one specific state was kind of unclear. But as it stands now, we've had drop zones start up again in most states. So in WA, Northern Territory, New South Wales, South Australia and Queensland, some drop zones have started up again. So there was a request to have a discussion and a chat about experiences since startup, because obviously there are a lot of aspects to take into consideration. There's safety, the currency aspect, not having jumped for a long while, having aircraft and equipment on the ground. There's the health concerns, not only from the public, but some staff have had concerns about catching viruses and COVID, etc. And then obviously there's the business aspects, the financial aspects about operating. And just to use a comparison, the hospitality industry has been struggling with this as the restrictions were slowly being released or relaxed, in terms of they can open for a limited number of patrons. And yeah, it's great to open your doors and have business walking through, but a lot of these businesses have said that it's not worth their while opening for only 10 people, considering their overheads and staff costs. And from the same point of view, from a skydiving point of view, obviously it's not financially viable to send up half a plane load on every single load. So there are all those considerations as well. So the idea is to have a chat with a few CIs. So I've requested a few people a few CIs and other drop zones to give us feedback, and there are a few other CIs on the forum as well. So, and obviously not only CIs can respond, but anybody who's been involved with a drop zone and through this process. So I have a few questions about this, and I'll ask questions to specific CIs to respond. We've got Al Gray, who graciously and willingly said that he's happy to be involved with the process. I've had responses from Cindy as well. Unfortunately, she can't be here today. Peter Lonan has probably been the CI whose operation's been going the longest. Unfortunately, he's otherwise occupied today, but Heath, who's his probably most regular DZSO, is on here today, so he'll be able to give us some information and insight on what they've experienced up today. And I'll ask some questions, and obviously if anybody wants to comment or give a contribution, you're welcome to jump in. So the first question is basically, what was the biggest challenge that may have prevented you from starting up any earlier? So obviously everybody's been waiting, and there can be a multiple factors. For example, we all know regulations was one, but were there any other factors? For example, lack of clients or public nervousness, etc. So Al, if you can give us some idea about that.
Yeah, thanks, Charl. Well, part of there was always whether you're going to get permission jump or not. And South Australia was fairly lucky in the limited amount of COVID-related incidents, and then South Australia was COVID-free. I don't think we've got any active cases at the moment and haven't had any for the last few weeks. But trying to get someone to make a decision on our behalf, and I realised the APF were letting all the drop zones do it in line with what the state policies were. But I called the COVID hotline. They told me to call the police. I called the police. They said, "What's it got to do with us? We only uphold the law," sort of thing. "We don't make it." So then I went back to the COVID people, and they said, "No, you've just got to be happy that the police aren't going to fine you." And I thought, well, how is that going to help things? And so then I got back to the police, and they have a COVID compliance hotline. I sent them an email, and I also wrote to my local MP. She sent it up to the state premier. I've not heard back from them, but essentially there was some of the other considerations were that if we've got two aircraft sitting in ground risk for insurance, just to take one of the planes on a 10-minute flight back to Parafield just for a bit of maintenance, like to put it into flight risk for that 10-minute flight was another $500. And then I thought, well, put it back into flight risk and then get told a week after we, if we make our own minds up and go jumping, and then somebody says, shut it down again, then, we're up for more money for, closing down the insurance again. There was just nobody that could give us permission. So we were going to do it. There was no one saying that we couldn't do it, but there was no one saying we could. So we were going to go straight ahead and do it with fun jumpers only. Before we actually got to that point, the police compliance people came back to us and said, yep, you're covering all the bases. We've got no issue with us. They wrote to us and gave us that permission in writing. And so we were able to start last Saturday. And we did, it was only open to fun jumpers last week because we wanted to see how people could safely carry out the skydiving side of things with regard to perceived perceptions, I guess, that we weren't spreading the virus any further. And, there was a few issues, but we're happy that we're going to start tandems from now.
Okay, yeah, great. Thanks, Al. Heath, if you'd like to add something about what got you over the line starting jumping, because as far as I'm aware, you were the first drop zone in Australia that started jumping again about, what was it, about 2 weeks ago?
About 3 weeks now, yeah. Really the biggest challenges were just the state mandated stuff. I mean, where we are is a small town and it's mostly older people. So obviously one of the major concerns is that we weren't going to bring a virus to a town which is going to infect, and there's a lot of immune compromised retirees here. So that was the first thing to consider. The second was the border closures. We aren't able to get many people to come and jump up here because we're in quite a remote area, 3 hours north of Perth for most people. So that's a big concern. There's no real point in us opening and doing anything until the intrastate borders are open, so we could actually facilitate people actually jumping. And then the same issues as Alan, really. We had to make sure that we're working with the police because there's no real clear way to negotiate your way through this. So I sat down and wrote a policy which was based off what the APF had, which is based off what the state had, and it was based off, there was a Western Australian tourism, there's like, if you own a restaurant or something, is this the Western Australian state mandated program, an online course that you could go and do. It's a bit of an insult to your intelligence, really, about how to clean stuff and go about making sure that you sterilise stuff and make sure you have things available to people. So we went and got all the staff to go and do that, and then we just started slowly with introducing stuff that was easy to control, because it was only 2 months since most of the people are jumping here. We were a lot of regulars. So we just assessed everybody as they came in through the doors, and then just took an individual case at a time, got people doing smaller stuff, and just made it obvious to people that you can't perform where you were 2 months ago, and we slowly introduced that, and now we're back up and running pretty much as normal. But we looked at what hairdressers were doing, we looked at what other industries were, how they were able to operate. We had 20 people maximum, so instead of just opening the drop zone and having people come in, we booked them into 4 slots a day in groups of 20 people, and then made it really enforced to them what the police had said to us, is that it's fine if you operate with, you've got procedures here, you've got policies, as long as you don't have all these people standing at the front and not observing these, these human 1.5 metre spacing rules that we sort of have to abide by. As long as people are not doing that out in the general public, and we're demonstrating to be conforming to these things, then the only real problem we've had is a couple of people in town come out to the airport and observe us. And now with, this, I think the state has come out and told us that aviation is exempt from a lot of these things anyway. So we started with 10 people on the plane, no people down the centre, just to separate people. We had buffs and masks, just so when we're driving through the town, we're trying to minimise the way that people can contract the virus, and just move forward from there. And then slowly, we started with qualified B licence and above, and then we started going with A licence. Now I did the first AF course this week, and since we've opened, it's been actually really busy, sun up to sundown with candidates and stuff. So it's pretty much how we went about tackling it. We sit in a unique place here, where Western Australia is probably one of the most remote places in the world, and there's bugger all cases of COVID. So from our standpoint, as long as we protected the town and the older people here, we're all pretty fit, we're all pretty healthy. I didn't have any real concerns about myself contracting it. It's the town,
Yeah. Okay, thanks. And what you mentioned about the tourism sector in WA is interesting, because both South Australia Tourism and WA Tourism actually published notifications which said that specific modes of tourism transport is exempt from the restrictions, and it includes aircraft used for tourism, boats used for tourism, etc. And there's a recommendation that if you can social distance and have open seats, it's advisable, but it's not required. And based on that, it basically opens the door for skydiving in those 2 states. NT has specifically mentioned that skydiving could start both sports jumps and tandems last weekend. So that in those states, those announcements makes it pretty simple to start up, where some of the other states don't have it as that specific yet.
Well, sorry, can I just jump in? When we first started, that wasn't the case. We have to ferry people to and from the airport. We don't have the drop zone is not at the landing area, it's separate from the airport. So we had to ferry people with vehicles. So we made it that you only had 1 person on each seat, and that we demonstrated to wear buffs and stuff, and then minimising the amount of contact that people have with one another. They were the main points that sort of got us across the line and got the police to give us a thumbs up, really.
And the next question is in terms of the specific COVID safety procedures. Now, both of you have mentioned specific procedures that you've put in place, and I'll just mention what Cindy said that they did at their drop zones as well. So obviously, a COVID risk management plan had to be in place. What they did is they had a specific COVID waiver that had to be signed in addition to the regular APF and club waivers. And the plan was to take everybody's temperature on arrival at the drop zone, to get them to sign the waiver and say that they're symptom-free, that they haven't traveled overseas in the last 2 weeks and haven't had contact with anybody who's positive. So that's all kind of similar to all the other sectors of tourism or other industries as well. What they did initially is they reduced aircraft capacity to allow for more spacing inside the aircraft. Face masks or face coverings had to be worn until the 3-minute light. Hand sanitizer was available at the DZ, hand soaps, signage, disinfecting services, etc. Now, just a general question: is this generally what most drop zones started off initially?
Yeah. Sorry, Al Gray. Yeah, pretty much the same. We limited the drop zone to 20 people initially, and had the same thing. Take the temperature, take the names of every person that's on the drop zone, that they're feeling well and they haven't been exposed and that type of thing. As far as seating in the aircraft, we were initially going. I mean, we've only got a 206 and a 182, so you reduce the seating too much. You've got only the pilot in the plane. So we were going to reduce it to no more than 4 people on the 206. But with the police advice through the compliance people, their thing said that their advice centred around movable objects. This is similar to what you said, Charl, anyway, about air transport. But the advice centres around movable objects, as in the plane, and they're not subject to the density provisions or the physical distancing. The physical distancing is best efforts given the circumstances, and in brackets that the parties are not facing each other. So in the 206, for example, pilot's wearing a mask, the tandem masters or the fun jumpers are wearing a full face helmet or a mask, because there are exemptions for CRW for open face helmets, where they wear a buff and or a mask. And their comms helmet. We had a medical, we had a young lad who has a cochlear implant, and he couldn't wear a full face helmet with that because it doesn't cover the neck part of it. So, gave him an exemption, but he had an open face helmet and a mask or a buff. So it was, as long as those things were covered, then it was fairly simple. And even the 20 people, it's fairly liberal in South Australia, not getting political, but the areas. So you have inside the hangar, we could have no more than 20 people. Outside of the hangar, we could have another 20 people. Upstairs on the sun deck, we could have 12 people. So essentially we could have, 50 odd people at the drop zone, and still be within the regulations there. But in the plane, I flew a couple of loads and sort of looking around at the fun jumpers on the weekend, those with full face helmets, I looked around at them and every one of them had their masks open, and most of them did their visors open with no masks on. And so when we got to the ground, I said, hey, we've got to play the game here. So I found it was a bit of an inconvenience for the jumpers. It was a new thing. It's getting a bit warm here. I'm getting fogged up with my visor closed. So I think in those instances that they need to wear, if they've got a full face helmet on, but they've got a buff and their visor's open, then that's an acceptable form of playing by the rules.
Yeah. Thanks, Al. It's great. So obviously there's something that you planned on implementing that once you operated, it didn't work that well, and you had to adapt. Anything in what you implemented in terms of specifically COVID protection that you found that you thought this will be a good idea that wasn't quite doable or practical or effective?
Well, I thought about, cleaning down the plane after each load. Even with hot loads, it's fairly simple because we had a big industrial packet of sanitising wipes sort of thing. As soon as the pilot lands, he's able to reach back, clean the door handles and things like that. The load master gets in there, he gets another one, wipes down the external handles and all that sort of thing, wipes the floor down, cleans, gives the seat belts a wipe over, and you might lose 30 seconds sort of thing, but that was fairly simple. I thought we were going to have to shut down in between each load, but you don't actually have to do that. Everything else was fairly well achievable.
Thanks. And Heath, you guys at Jurien Bay?
Oh, much the same, really. I mean, it didn't really impact any of the processes we had too much. We just have the ground crew and the those fueling to sanitize and wipe down, and we just have a periodic thing in the shop in the area here. But we kind of do most of that stuff anyway. It's about keeping the toilets clean, about keeping the stuff sanitized and clean anyway. So I didn't really feel like those things impacted us much at all. It was pretty easy to get around any of that stuff, in my opinion. Doesn't seem to have no big workload on the staff or anything like that. So.
Charl, can I just add one more item to that? And the advice we had on a lot of this stuff also centred around the ability, if there was an outbreak, for tracing. And it was great. And Al and I had this discussion on the phone, but to put into people's plans that we keep extensive and accurate details of everyone that does a jump, everyone that goes in the aircraft, including dates of birth, contact details, the whole lot. So in the event of a breakout, tracing would be very easy. And of course, if you're in the restaurant business, that stuff's difficult, but it's very easy for us because it's a basic thing that's on our manifest and in our pink cards and everything else. So that's something that we can volunteer as available, but something we do anyway.
Yeah, thanks, Richard.
I thought that type of all that type of stuff was actually quite easy to do because we manifest, we have all their details anyway. So the important thing was that we had some sort of way to colour it and show that we demonstrated that if something did come through here and we were partially responsible for it, that we had sent out and had all the people that were jumping, we had forms that, I haven't been exposed to, I haven't been sick, and then if anybody answered yes to those questions, and we quite simply didn't have them at the Dropzone for that period of time, because I didn't find any of this particularly hard to get around.
Yeah, something that Cindy mentioned was that they initially offered face masks to all their tandem customers, but most of them didn't wish to wear this, and they didn't see this as a big issue if they weren't symptom-free or if they were symptom-free and answered all the questions correctly. They didn't think this was too much of an issue. So they leave that as optional for the tandem customers to wear the mask or not. Any comments on that?
I wasn't going to, but I've heard that, and as long as the tandem master's got himself squared away and the fun jumpers, then if the passenger doesn't want to wear one, I have the masks available for them, but if they don't want to wear them, I guess that's okay.
Same thing. We make a mask available. We have them out there. Not one person has taken it. We have buffs available for people, and I've taken to wearing a full face helmet doing tandems for the first time in my career. I have to be fair here. It just seems like a non-event. Nobody seems to. In the west coast of Australia, there's no cases here. Nobody seems to really consider it to be a thing over here. So, we go through all the measures to make sure that we're not going to infect anybody if someone does come through. But as far as tandem customers go, they have very little concern about it.
Okay, thanks. So next, we'll move away from the COVID situation and management of that to the currency. Now, both of you, Al and Heath, you've mentioned how you've staged the starting up of firstly sports jumpers. So I'd like to have a quick discussion about our currency of students and fun jumpers were experienced in the first place, and the second place, how it was managed. And I'll start off by just mentioning what Cindy said, that they initially started with D license and D certificate D and above. And then the following day, they opened with certificate B and above. And only the third day, they started with students. And by the end of the week, they started with, or they continued with tandems. She said most of their instructors were within the time frame, so within the currency requirements for instructors and tandem masters. However, a few tandem masters elected to do the currency jump, although they were still inside, but just inside. So they felt more comfortable doing the currency jump before they started off. And then obviously all tandem masters did emergency procedure refreshers before they started. Students were assessed as normal. and so that was kind of okay. And no one was permitted to manifest until they received a briefing from the DZO, which included the COVID aspects. Now, SAS asked a question as well as how he found people's currency, particularly to low jump number fun jumpers. So if you can give us some insights on how you stage this process, or what specific procedures you put in place for different categories of jumpers in assessing or retraining currency, that would be great. Heath, if you can start with this one, please.
A big part of the way which we decided to go about doing that was partially financially driven, because shutting a business down for 2 months has a big impact on the business. So we looked at who was easiest we could get bodies into the plane and get the stuff moving, and we made people that wanted to come and jump commit to 4 jumps per day, and then we booked them in over weekend slots, and then just assess them as they came. And for here, it was only 2 months, so it was really just a quick assessment with most people and just get them to stick to basic jumps in the beginning, and very quickly that was easy to get back up and running. And we introduced a license just so we staggered the kind of load on the drop zone and my load when it come to dealing with people as they arrived. And now we've moved to have students, now that we've got most of the people who are currently in the state up and jumping again, then it's just back to a one-on-one case, which is really what it was just anyway. We just made sure that I was starved for time in order to do it, and Pete and I were able to manage that easily, and that's been a pretty easy stepping stone. So we went 1 week being above, got most of the people through that. We did that again for another week, and then that's most of the state done. So then we introduced a license and above and assessed them, and then now we're up and running with anybody really. It hasn't been too difficult for us. So as far as it goes with instructors, we only have a few here. And those that chose and felt like, we went through emergency procedures, and those that wanted to jump with an experienced jumper on the front did. And it was only 2 months for me, and I just went over EPs with everybody here and made sure I was checked as much as they were checked. And yeah, it really 2 months really for us. So it wasn't that big of a deal as far as I'm concerned.
Al?
Yeah, we started on Saturday with B license and above only, no tandems, unless they were doing currency jumps. We had a safety briefing beforehand, just mainly Richie Timperon briefed the guys on, we come back, you're probably not going to be as sharp as you were when you finished jumping. So just take things up, 500 to 1,000 feet, for opening. Just play around and keep your landings fairly conservative. There were no issues at all in that regard. We did put everyone through emergency procedures, experienced or otherwise, and we didn't do any tandem currency on the Saturday. We only had one guy who needed to do tandem currency on the Sunday, and he did 1 jump. He's got to do. I want him to do one. He's got to do at least 1 more on. So he's not out of currency, so to speak, but he's only a young tandem master, so. I wanted to do 1 more on that. The other tandem masters are all in date, and we've yet to put them up. So Saturday, Sunday, Monday was fairly quiet. Still with Sunday we only had 1 A licensed jumper, or guy who'd finished his AF course, and he did 3 or 4 jumps, and he was pretty stoked. But we're running AF course tomorrow, and starting tandems on Saturday, and it was all very good. People landings were there were no surprises. There was no one there who looked like the 2 months off did them a lot of damage, so to speak.
Okay, great. Thanks, Heath and Al. Yeah, that basically answers the next question that I wanted to ask, is if you noticed anything mentionable when you reviewed the jumpers or if you saw any patterns once you started jumping, or specific behavior that required additional attention. But Al, you just mentioned that there was nothing of real concern or nothing that bothered you. And Heath, with your guys, anything that you noticed?
Just the lesser experience or not quite as good canopy pilot. It's just needed to have a bit more attention, as you'd expect, really. And all the guys who are the gun flyers who come and all thought they could just jump back in and be shredding up in the sky again really weren't able to really recognise that 2 months off really had a big effect on what they were doing. But the canopy piloting is always is the nuts and bolts, I think. Yeah. Some people just require a bit more attention than they. As the ones that required attention required a bit more of attention, and that's been, that's an educational ongoing thing.
Yeah. Thanks, Heath. And yeah, Al, you mentioned as well that you had the message that jumpers needed to fly a little bit more conservatively and more carefully, and that answers a question that Bria had earlier about flying landing patterns. So obviously, just focusing on that, being conservative on the first few jumps.
And the younger people, the guy, we put a radio helmet on the guy, even though he was off his AFF. We put a radio helmet on him as a backup, just in case, but he had no problems.
Yeah, something that Cindy mentioned as well is that after the break, it basically gave a lot of jumpers appreciation for the opportunity what they have, which they don't want to lose again. And they don't, every single jumper they have didn't want to be the first one to screw up once they came back. So they didn't want to be that person. And so that was kind of an extra incentive, because being kind of nervous when they started coming back, especially the low jump number jumpers, they didn't want to be the one screwing up in front of all the others. So that kind of made sure that everybody does the right thing. Have you had any comments by any jumpers or instructors in terms of their experiences, or maybe the younger jumpers saying they're a little bit nervous or unsure of something? Anybody who came up with something specific? Heath, if you have anything.
Yeah, we've got a couple of cases of people who just really keen, but kind of a little bit slow to learn the canopy side of things. So obviously they're the ones I was talking about before, required a bit more of attention. We had one who bought herself a rig which has had a tiny reserve and a main which is too small for her, and she's been working towards that for a long time. And we just, as Al was saying, just make sure we get the people like that on the radio, and those jumpers know that their skill sets aren't as good as they could be and where they want them to be, and they come up, and we work closely with them to help them with that. So there's few cases of that. Most of the people that we have jumping here, most of the state are all relatively experienced, the people that come back anyway. So it's been pretty easy to deal with them, but there are those fringe cases. So same as Al, I guess.
Yeah. Thanks, Al. Anything you'd like to mention on that?
Nothing that stands out, but as Heath said, there was plenty of people around the drop zone that were, whether it was for their own good as well, but they were there helping the younger jumpers, sort of thing, and being packing exit practice. Actually, with the younger guy, he did have a couple of bad exits. Now come to think of it. The canopy control was surprisingly good, but his exits, and one guy said to me, how did he finish his A license with exits like that? And I said, well, he's got like 15, 16 jumps, and he's had a couple of months off. So, we've got to work on those sorts of things. But otherwise it was fairly good.
Thanks. Now, on that topic, is there anybody else here today who would like to mention something about when they started jumping again, if there was anything they noticed or felt that was, or had any other jumpers mention about being nervous or unsure when they started up again?
I found surprisingly that everybody was. Even the people that have, you know, a lot of jumps behind them, everybody seemed nervous to me, and I thought that to be a particularly good thing. It meant that people were kind of respecting the sport that we're in and recognising that when currency is definitely a notable thing within the sport.
Yeah, that is true, and I mean, doesn't everybody? If you haven't jumped for a long time, especially on the canopy side, you're simply not as accurate. The brain's ability to make all those calculations of speed and depth and rate of deceleration. If you do something every single day, the brain's and the reaction stays smart and sharp, and the longer the delay, the less practice the brain becomes, and it's just one of those things. And I'd just quickly like to touch on incidents. So since we started jumping, which is about 3 weeks, we've had a few incidents. There's been six incidents in Australia. And all of them, when you look at them, it's all those type of incidents that could happen any time of the year, whether you're current or not. But it's all incidents. When you look at them, you go, well, currency or lack of currency may have played a role as well. I'll just go give a quick rundown. There's one. I won't give any locations. If you know the people, this is not. I'm not making any comments on the incident. I wasn't there. I don't have all the details. But so there's one where somebody overshot the landing area and landed in a fence. Now, if you think about that, could currency play a role in that? Obviously, it could. There's one where there was a packing error. Could be currency of the packer after not packing for a while. There was a tracking jump where two jumpers bumped into each other in free fall, which dislodged the riser cover, which led to a malfunction. Could that be related to currency? It could. And then there was an unstable wingsuit deployment with a bad body position. We know these things happen all the time, but when it happens now, you may think, may currency have played a role there? Yeah, it may have. A few weeks ago in the States, there was a very serious tandem incident at Titusville. Some of you may be aware of that. This was just after they started jumping again, where a tandem master exited the plane, deployed the drogue around the passenger's leg, immediately deployed the reserve. The reserve had tension knots. He couldn't get the tension knots out, deployed. Eventually, he got the drogue off, deployed the main. And if they didn't go through an oak tree before they hit the ground, they wouldn't have survived, but both of them survived. But once again, just starting up after the shutdown, a tandem master being too quick on the drogue or not getting stable quickly, currency may have played a role there. Unfortunately, the USA had its first fatality since the startup again, where a jumper missed the landing area and landed on a spinning propeller of another plane. Once again, not accurate in the landing. May currency have played a role? I'm sure currency may have played a role there as well. So when we look at these incidents, in all of them, there's a possibility that being uncurrent or not having jumped recently may have played a role, which just emphasizes that, I mean, all the steps that Al, you and Heath have mentioned, that Cindy's mentioned, all the steps that we take, emphasizing to jumpers that we need to be careful when we get back. And this covers all levels of jumpers, all experience levels, that you have to be careful. You have to think about these things. Robbo asked the question about the new normal, or jumpers take this seriously. And I think now at this point, in terms of currency, I think everybody should, in terms of social distancing and stopping diseases from spreading. That's something else. That's something everybody should probably take seriously as well. I read an article the other day that for April this year, the flu infection rate in Australia has dropped 99% compared to last year. So it appears that the COVID isolation and procedures have actually stopped people from catching the flu, which is a bad thing, and may show that we all just need to be more careful and have better hygiene practices, and maybe we won't even catch the flu that much. But let's move on to another topic, and this is aircraft and pilots, and obviously this is something that that we have to think about as well. When we get back in the air, it's not just the skydivers and the COVID situation, but a lot of pilots may be out of currency as well. And I'd just like to mention that CASA Sports Office sent out a message earlier this week that based on the reports that the ATSB received over the last 2 weeks in terms of sports aviation pilots, this is not skydiving related, that they've seen a big spike in incidents that are definitely currency and procedures related in the last 2 weeks. So they just are sending the message out to keep people advised to, especially sports pilots, to focus on their procedures and currency if they haven't flown in a while. So Al, if you can tell us if you've done something specific with regard to aircraft and pilots,
yeah.
You've noticed something. Thanks.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's only 2 to 3 months, and there's simple things in it, simple things which can lead to disaster, and it might just be something like checking the fuel taps on or something like that, or which is certainly part of your scan and your checks. But if you don't follow a checklist, which a lot of pilots don't, follow a formal checklist there when they're doing every load because they're well versed in it. Then if they're not doing it for a couple of months, then there's things that you can miss. So we've got the recurrency. I'm just trying to find where it was now, but we've got the recurrency checklist. So my chief pilot and I have sat down and he's put me through it. I've put him through it. He went for a lap. I went for a couple of laps. And before we got back in the saddle to fly jumpers, but so we've done it before we have to, because should do it every 6 months, I think it is, and so we've done it after this break, and I think everyone needs to at least look at it. Even if you're still within currency, you need to either drag your checklist out and fly a couple of loads. If you're not going to fly it without if you're not going to fly with passengers, then certainly do a couple of laps before you take up a proper load.
Thanks, Al. Anything from your side, Heath? Aviation, aircraft pilots, in terms of what you did or noticed?
I'm no pilot, so I leave that to the pilots. But Pete and our other pilot, Andrew, they both went up and did check flights and touch and goes, and did cross checks and confirmed all that before we started putting bodies in the plane. So,
yeah. Anybody else would like to say anything about pilot currency or aircraft? Anything on the aircraft side that anybody noticed?
Well, aircraft maintenance is obviously one. So if the planes have just been sitting there for a while, there's batteries, there's tyres, there's things like that. But that is, I guess that's what Cass is talking about as well. Because if planes aren't flying, they go out of they go unserviceable much quicker.
Yeah. Yeah, we all know rubber seals, for example. If they don't move, they perish quicker. So there are all kinds of things, and fuel as well. Fuel that's been standing for a while isn't always good. especially operations where they don't have bowsers but still use fuel drums. That can be an issue as well, and something that needs to be looked at. Okay, something else. In terms of the community, Heath, you mentioned something earlier about the community, but we can combine community and customers in terms of when you start up. Have you found that customers are keen to get back into it, or that some of them are still a little bit nervous getting back, given the whole COVID situation?
I don't know if I can speak to whether people are nervous or not, because if they are, they just wouldn't contact us to get in contact to try and jump. But we got the staff that man the phones here. We got calls the whole way through, wondering if we were jumping through the event as it was. So we've I didn't think we would be as busy as we have been with the tandem side of things. We've actually probably got near half the amount of half the amount of bookings that we have just been through people walking in through the door, as much as they've been through people booking. So we've been actually, I've been averaging 3, I say, tandems a day or something like that. So for the days that we're operating, I didn't expect that at all. So as far as I see in Western Australia, people that are coming to jump aren't so concerned about it.
Yeah. Thanks, Heath. Al, your views on that?
Yeah, we've had calls during the week, from a lot of people that had prior bookings and wondering when we're starting up again. But we did put it fairly plainly on our Facebook page and the website. So most other people, I guess, got their information from there. It's going to be a slow start, I think, because going into the winter, we're fairly slow down here anyway, but getting the word out there is look, we got a few bookings on, but nothing to write home about.
Okay, now I have one more point to discuss, and that is based on what you've experienced and seen so far. What do you think or foresee the short-term future? I don't think we want to look too far into the future in terms of skydiving in general and the skydiving industry may look like. Al, if you can go first.
Yeah, well, I've heard a lot of different opinions. Some people say we're going back to the 80s and Cessna drop zones are going to take off, and all of those with turbines are going to be out of business. But one can only hope. No, that was a joke. Look, I don't know. I hope that people are going to be. Like myself, for example, we eat out quite a lot now because we want to help out the restaurants and things like that have been down and give everyone a bit of help. So hopefully, obviously the international tourism side of things is going to affect us in it somewhat, but hopefully the locals may want to help the skydivers out more than they ordinarily would have. So it's anyone's guess. I'm pretty sure it's going to be down, but how much, I don't know.
Yeah, thanks, Al. Heath, based on what you've seen over the last 3 weeks, any patterns or anything that you may expect or foresee?
It's a good question to answer, mate. I'm not sure where to begin answering that question. Like I said before, we live in this is a small town. It's a long way from any sort of city or any sort of major populace, and we are heavily involved with the town when it comes to tourism. We bring a lot of the guys that come to town. They spend a lot of money here, so the whole town is, barring a few people that don't like the plane noise, are pretty behind us up and running. And the police, despite all the manner of different opinions on the COVID event that we've all been through, when it comes to this part of the world, it has very little influence on what we're doing. So, I could talk all night and all day to my thoughts on this, but I don't think this is quite the forum for that.
I think one of the constraints.
That's the answer to that one. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all good. I think one of the constraints that we all realise does affect the skydiving industry, as many parts of the tourism industry, is the fact that borders are still closed. So state borders are still closed, which limits it to a certain effect. But obviously, international travel is not going to commence soon. And once it does, it will be, we all know it's going to be limited to specific countries initially, because although I think being in Australia and being in such a good position in terms of the coronavirus, we sometimes lose perspective when you look at how bad it still is in other parts of the world, which might prevent international travel from happening. Anybody else with any comments or opinions or anything they'd like to contribute to this? Or although I know it's kind of looking into a crystal ball.
I got something to say. I was jumping in the States when the GFC happened, and as it was happening, we were all panicking that, you know, no one's going to come out to the drop zone, no one's going to be jumping anymore. And in fact, it was probably the best thing that happened to the drop zone, because the people that were going to go away and spend their $10,000 on a family holiday, they weren't going to do that anymore, but they were going to go to somewhere local and spend $500 or $1,000 for the family to do something. So you never, like Al and Heath and Charl all said, you never know what's going to happen. But being a bit optimistic, there is a big local market, and like Al said, when you say locals, that means Australians. I think Australians are going to get out there, and rather than go and see the world, they'll go and see Australia. And seeing Australia means maybe see it from 13,000 feet under a parachute. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom.
Perhaps there's a lot of market in that, and a lot of people, instead of going for holidays to Bali, will do holidays inside of Australia. And but certainly that's a thing in the Western Australian coast anyway.
Yeah, look, I agree. I think there's a lot of opportunities, even though the sport will probably be devastated. For example, we can't go to the US to go to Paris to do big waves. The backpackers aren't coming to the East Coast from overseas to do tandems. So there's already going to be some ramifications. But as far as the sport's concerned, as far as, you know, the fun jumper, the instructors and coaches, so what if you've got a 182 or a 206? You can do 4 waves. You can get 2 206s and do 8 waves. So it's not all gone. And in a place where I live, Port Macquarie, now that you're allowed to travel beyond 50 kilometres, there's a lot more tourists coming here, locals, and I agree. People will go and look at Australia. Now, Western Australia is a bloody long way away, my home state. It is isolated. They have shut the border. Well, it may as well be another bloody country. Anyway.
Thanks, Robbo. Well, that's if there's nothing else, that's all I have, unless somebody else has anything else they'd like to say on this topic. Nothing else? Well, yeah, my message is just stay safe, do the right thing. When in doubt, take a step back, take a deep breath, think about what you're doing, look after one another, and yeah, let's keep pushing forward and do the best we can. That's all we can do. And hope the industry returns to some form of normality. And yeah, Al and Heath, thank you very much for your contributions and your time, and everybody else, thanks for your attendance and your questions and comments. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Charl. Well done. Thanks, Heath. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Robbo.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone that attended. While you're here next week, I think we've got Cyprus going to join us next week. Yeah, Heath, you got something else?
I was just going to say, if anybody at any drop zones wants any help with any of the policies or anything like that, just get in contact with us here, because we're more than happy to share what we've done and how that's gotten us up in the air.
Awesome. Thanks, Heath.
Thanks,
Great.
Heath.
Yeah, so next week, Cyprus will be on the show, and we're still confirming the second guest for next week. A week after that, Brett Newman's going to do a talk about pulling your gear out of storage. So that'll be an interesting one for everyone. And on that note, again, thank you all for joining us.